Okay, fantastic. So my name's Gillian. I'm located in Corpus Christi, Texas. And you might have heard that we're having Tropical Storm Alberto to visit. So my connection might be a little bit weak. All right. So if I do get pushed off again, just know that it's not you. It's me. Well, it's Alberto. All right. So what I'd really like is if we could go around and if you could just give me your name, your pronouns if you'd like to share them, where you're located, and then since we're going to be talking about meetings today, let's talk about the worst meeting behavior that you've seen, right? So that could be, of course, in your snap meetings. I'm sure everyone is perfectly well behaved, so you don't have any complaints there. But think back to when you were in class, times when you've had, meetings for other groups, church meeting, whatever it is, right? So just give me an example of one bad meeting behavior, folks. So back to the recording. All right, that's excellent. And you know what? Actually, that recording practice is a very good one, right? If you're going to get people to have candid conversations and share about their personal lives, right? You probably do want to not record that piece. So being sensitive about recording is actually a really good place to start, right? Thinking about what people are risking by speaking up in a public situation, no matter how kind of intimate that public situation might be. So I'm going to start out by sharing my screen. Um, I have a very sweet cat named Fannie Lou, after Fannie Lou Hamer, and she is going to try to climb all over right now. So just bear with her. She's very enthusiastic. All right. So you should be looking at a slide that says how to meetings. Yeah, got really creative with the titles there, right? So for this, we're going to be talking about how to set an agenda, in general, how to kind of try to facilitate a meeting. All right. Um, in general, this is best practice for any meeting. We always at Healthcare Now, when we meet with other folks, we have a set of group agreements. And these are group agreements that we've developed at Healthcare Now over the course of our existence. But for your organization, you might have different group agreements, but it's all always really nice to start from a point where everyone agrees to be good, and then we can hold people accountable to that later, right? And also, this is a good way of weeding out at the beginning people who might be just really not willing to play the game, right? So for example, you'll look and you'll see that one of the group agreements here is like respect gender pronouns. I'm just saying that every once in a while we'll have a training where like an older person will be like, what gender pronouns, that oppresses me, and I'll just be like, no, I'm sorry, that's actually non-negotiable. And if you can't deal with that, you really probably shouldn't be here. So it's a good way to kind of, again, set the baseline at the very beginning. So here are the oh, Fanny. Here are the group agreements that we use for Healthcare Now for our trainings, right? We ask people to be present for the whole training if possible. There are lots of reasons why people might have to like turn off their camera or whatever. But if you're going to turn off your camera, make sure it's for a good reason. Um, practice active listening. Make sure you're actually hearing what people are saying before you jump in. Offer supportive feedback, right, as opposed to kind of critical or harsh feedback. Step up, step back. This one appears on almost every leftist group agreement list. Does anyone know what step up, step back is? If you know what step up, step back is, you've probably been told to step back at some point. Basically, what step up, step back is that if you're the kind of person who doesn't usually speak in groups, then you want to challenge yourself to step up because we'd love to hear from you and we need your perspective. If you're the kind of person who's a little bit of a chatty Cathy, maybe someone like me who's always talking, you want to challenge yourself to step back and let someone else talk and make space for other people. All right. So we're going to respect confidentiality of all participants, right? Going back to not recording when people are disclosing personal information. This is like especially true if you're, I know you just talking about healthcare, right? Like always gets intimate, it always gets personal, and inevitably in any kind of a training, someone will tell some kind of story that shouldn't be shared outside the training. So what we like to tell people is take away what you've learned from this story, but leave that story for that person to tell, right? We all deserve to be able to tell our stories. So, and then finally, yeah, we have speak only from your own experience, right? Don't make generalizations about groups that you are not a part of, for example, and then respect gender pronouns. Because the most fundamental form of respect that we can offer someone is to call them the way they want to be called, right? Um, all right. How does everyone feel about those group agreements? Can we get a thumbs up on them if you agree to them? Is there anyone who disagrees with these group agreements and would like to add something or change something? No, we're good. All right. So then I'm going to take that as a sign that we are on the same page. So we already did introduction, so I'm just going to skip past that. Let's talk a little bit about setting an agenda, right? So I'm going to be talking about different kinds of pieces of the agenda, and one of the words that I'm going to be using is program, right? So in nonprofit industrial complex world, when we talk about the actual stuff that we're doing, that's program, right? So if you're running a campaign, that's program. If you're, going to be going and doing an event, right, that's program. So you want to set the programmatic pieces of the agenda in advance, right? Because those are the things that people are really going to want to weigh in on, right? Um, and you want to get their feedback before the meeting. If people know before the meeting what the meeting is going to be about, they're going to be so much more likely to be on point and focused, right? Um, so circulating a meeting agenda in advance is a great way, without even thinking about the pieces that are actually on the agenda. Just circulating it in advance will definitely help to get people kind of under control. Again, you want to get feedback before the meeting, so you're not walking into the meeting and someone's like, wait, I disagree with the entire premise of this meeting, right? Which happens more than you would think, right? It's like people walking into a birthday party and being like, no, this should be an anniversary party. It's like, well, okay, we told you what this was going to be before. All right. Recap the agenda at the start of the meeting and ask for last minute changes, right? So that is a really good way, again, to kind of diffuse conflict before it happens, right? And to kind of set the table and really prepare for everything. Preparation is really the key to making sure that a meeting goes smoothly and like making sure that, so sorry, Fanny. Okay, Fanny. Making sure making sure that everyone knows what they're in for is a really big deal. Have you ever done any get out the vote work? Has anyone here ever done any get out the vote work where you call people and you tell them like, oh, the election's coming up on Tuesday. Have you made a plan to vote? We know that? No? You guys are going to have to do it at some point. At some point, you will have to do this. And what they tell you is that the most important thing, and this is based on anecdotes and also on like scientific studies, the most important thing is to get people to imagine what it would be like to vote, right? So be like, okay, are you going to walk there? Or are you going to take a car there? Are you going to, are you going to cast your vote alone? Or are you going to bring a friend? Are you going with people or whatever? Again, getting people to visualize their future actually helps them to actualize their future, which sounds like a woo-woo, new age thing, but it's actually true. All right. Um, now let's talk a little bit about what actually goes into a decent agenda, right? Um, all right. What actually goes into a decent agenda, right? We have introductions and some kind of community building. And this is really, really critical because if I don't care about any of the people involved, no matter how much I care about the cause, I'm probably going to drop off eventually. And I'm not going to feel a lot of obligation to be responsible for the things that I commit to, right? You have to have relationships. Organizing is something that the term organizing is something that we throw around. We make it super duper complicated, right? But when a young person asked Cesar Chavez and said, what is organizing? And Cesar Chavez said, uh, well, first you talk to one person and then you talk to another person. And the student was like, oh, no, 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 but you must have misunderstood. What I meant was like, but what is organizing, right? And Cesar Chavez says, well, you talk to one person and then you talk to another person, right? Organizing is just a series of conversations held individually and in groups, and a series of relationships that you're building with each other. So if you're not building relationships, you're not doing it right. That's really pretty much the only metric for whether or not you're doing it right in this field. All right, so introductions and community building, making sure everyone knows who's in the room, and giving someone, people like chance to kind of get to know each other as whole people is really, really critical. Um, Community agreements. We did that just now, right? Coming up with some kind of group agreements. If you don't have a group agreements already set up, you can come up with them on the spot, and just say to people, what would be some good rules for this conversation that we could all agree with? Coming up with community agreements together is a great way to kind of center a group's values, right? To really think about what is it that we're actually about. Community agreements can include everything from, it could be more specific stuff to, being a doctor and dealing with patients, right? It could be, like not mentioning patients' names when you talk. I imagine that's actually a HIPAA violation. Bad example. Um, but the point is that your community agreements could be very specific to your community, or they could be broader, like things like give, you know, good feedback, supportive feedback, or whatever. All right. So the next piece of your agenda, right, is going to be the getting stuff done piece, right? That's the program, right? That's the part where we're talking about what exactly we're going to be doing. We'll be doing some planning. You probably want to recap and get everyone on the same page, right? But that's the work part of the meeting. The next piece of the meeting, celebration and joy, right? We always want to include some part of a meeting that's actually going to make people feel good about being there. Now, this may sound very cheesy to you. I encounter all the time people who are like, can't we just do the damn work? Why do we have to do all this like touchy-feely stuff? The reason is because the touchy-feely stuff works. That is actually what brings people together. People are not generally held together by abstract values, right? They are held together by the values that are embodied by their relationships with people. Celebration and joy are really critical, because if people get beaten down, and you're going to see this when you work with a lot of the single payer groups in your states, you'll go back, and a lot of the folks there are older, they've been doing this work forever, and a lot of them are going to be kind of beaten down. And you know what? That's not good for anyone, right? It's not good for the movement, and it's not good for them either. Right? People who have spent their whole lives fighting for single payer shouldn't be sad about it. They're heroes. It's awesome, right? So we want to make sure to inject celebration and joy. And then the final piece is pragmatic. It's next steps, right? What are we going to do next to make sure that this happens? And that's really, really critical, because you want to make sure that no one meeting stands alone, that it's always part of a process of building up power, building up relationships with people, actually executing the program that you want to do, etc. Does that make sense to folks? Anyone have any like kind of thoughts about things that might does this jar and does this rattle anything loose for folks, or no? All right. Do your meetings already look like this? Maybe that's a better question. No, I'm seeing a no. Okay. All right. Well, this is what I would recommend. This is definitely something that took me a long time to figure out. I also wanted to kind of get straight into the meat of getting stuff done. But then I met an organizer named Mel King in Boston. We have another Bostonian here, right? I met an organizer named Mel King in Boston, and he told me we have to go slow to go fast. And what he meant by that is that there's going to be a flashpoint where you need to take quick action, right? There'll be a moment when single payer is up, in the for federal legislation, or will be up, or an AMA resolution or something like that, and you'll need to take quick action. But you're not going to be able to take quick action unless you've done the slow part of building up your relationships with each other, right? So go slow to go fast. You are not going to be able to get things done unless you take the long route of actually building relationships together. All right. So active listening tips. This is something that I think I'm going to make some real generalizations here. Your generation as a whole tends to be better at this than previous generations, including mine. Um, but let's go over again what some of what active listening can actually look like. Number one is repeat and verify what you heard, and that's really really critical. Basically, what that means is I'm saying I listened to you, which is why I'm able to repeat what you said, right? And you're saying what you're saying is important enough that I have remembered and processed it, right? Um, Also, this gives you an opportunity when you're wrong, right, to apologize and say, no, okay, oh, well, I didn't understand what you were saying, right? I didn't, maybe I missed your point about whether or not we should have flyers for this next action or something like that, right? So that's a really great part of active listening that can actually help to, again, diffuse conflicts before they start. If people move forward with two very different and frequently competing visions of what actually is supposed to be happening, eventually there's going to be some conflict. Validate emotions, right? Like people feel a certain way about things. This idea of feeling a certain way about things, this is itself kind of generational, right? That's a Gen Z slang that people didn't have, that boomers didn't have. But the idea that you have emotions and that it's necessary to express them, and that when people express emotions, you want to tell people, I hear you, right? I feel you. I feel some empathy with you. All right. Don't get distracted planning what you're going to say next. I always say don't write the punchline before you've heard the setup, right? Don't be sitting there waiting to make your brilliant point, and don't listen to and not listening to the things that actual people are saying. All right. And what else do we have here? Oh, don't interrupt. Again, like I said, that can actually be kind of a weird cultural thing, but in general, don't interrupt. And make eye contact if you can. Lots of reasons that people can't make eye contact while they're speaking, and that's totally fine. But if you can, it'll get you a little further. I'll be real with you there. All right. So so here's some kind of 5 common difficult meeting behaviors, right? And these speak to some of the things that you guys actually brought up. So we've got the dominator, right? The person who just won't stop talking, who won't stop talking down the facilitator, the person who insists, they're the first person to answer any question. They're the person who wants to start every conversation, right? They want to be the main character of this meeting, right? And probably the main character of your movement as well. How many people have encountered that at some point? Oh my God. If you haven't, you are lying. Yes. All right. All right. The naysayer, right? I actually find working with doctors that a lot of doctors tend to be the naysayers in conversation. They're smart. You're smart. They have a lot of expertise, right? And so it can be very easy for folks to be like, no, that's not going to work. I just don't see how that could be effective or whatever. And it's one thing when you're talking from your experience, right? Like we've tried 7 times to do a petition to Congressman X or whatever. But you don't want to yuck other people's yum, right? You don't want to dampen other people's enthusiasm. And you don't want to discount for the fact that, if we do things differently, right, we might have a different outcome than the way that we've done things before, right? So maybe that petition has failed, 5 times because we haven't been able to get enough signatures, but now we actually have a good plan to get more signatures. And now we think we can actually make a difference with that. Great. All right. The silent but deadly. The person who hides in the back of the meeting and then finally chimes up and is like, "I don't think this is going to work at all." People who refuse to participate in the discussion, right? That actually plans things, but then want to torpedo it as soon as everyone else has planned it. Have you guys experienced that? Okay, that one's maybe slightly less common, but so disruptive. The rabbit trailblazer, so that's the person who goes off on tangents, the person who can't stick to the topic, the person who will you'll be in the middle of talking about your next event and they'll be like, I think we really need to have a discussion about our mission statement. Yeah, maybe we do need to have a conversation about the mission statement, but in general, we should focus on what we've actually agreed to talk about here. And then finally, the multitasker, right? The person who's distracted, the person who is doing the New York Times crossword puzzle, the person who is doing playing Candy Crush, or also the person who is checking emails during meetings. I hate that. Like I closed my phone to be in this meeting. If you can't do the same, then go fuck yourself, really. So again, sorry about the language. So these are all kind of common difficult meeting behaviors. And again, I think that they actually kind of encompass some of the things that you pointed out there. And I kind of want to just think about them in context as we're kind of wrapping up here. So this is the part where I try to explain neurology to doctors. And you stop me when I get it all wrong. But this is basically based on the work of a neurologist named David Rock. These are things that we, I think, as activists know anecdotally, but recently there have been a lot of studies about the way that people work together and the way their brains work when they work together that have actually really validated a lot of the things that I think organizers knew anecdotally. So all of these, the reason that I think that organizers have really latched onto this particular model, the SCARF model, is because it validates a lot of the things that we already thought. So is that good science? I don't know. You should read the study and tell me. But here's the basic premise, right? David Rock found that people had everyone knows, right, that we have certain physical needs, right? We need food, we need water, we need shelter, right? And he looked at a bunch of studies that showed that when people's access to those basic needs, right, those physical needs are threatened, that their brains start to light up with fear. And it causes all of those terrible like fear responses that we all recognize, right? Fight, flight, fawn. What's the third one? Fourth one? Anyone? No. Anyway, so it causes this kind of paralysis, this kind of instant desire to be combative, right? When people's physical needs are threatened. So what David Rock did was he set up people who were working together on things that were not quite so life threatening, right? And what he found is that there are certain social needs that when people's access to those social needs is threatened, they have the same kind of fear responses that they do when their physical needs are threatened, right? So for example, we call it the SCARF because we really like acronyms. I don't know. Status. People need to feel important, it turns out. And some people you might look at and you might think that guy feels a little too important. But everyone needs to know that they have a kind of place in everybody needs to know that they have a place in the group, that there's some reason why they in particular need to be there, right? Why is it me who needs to be at this meeting and not just some other random person in our class, right? Certainty, right? I need my future to be secure. Um, I can remember like when the first time I was a boss at a nonprofit, I really messed this up a lot, right? Because I would try to be super honest with people and super frank about people about different ways that we could do things differently, and about kind of like different, tactics that we could take, different, whole strategies as an organization we could take, right? That makes people feel really insecure, right? So you have to really make sure that you are projecting a kind of certainty. This group is going to be around in a month, right? This group is going to be around in a year. We're going to be together and we're going to be fighting together, and that's a good thing, right? Autonomy. I need to have a say, right? I need to make sure that I, as an individual, am being recognized in the group. Relatedness, I need to be a part of the group, right? I need to feel like I'm part of it, I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? And fairness, I need to be treated equitably, right? I need to be treated um fairly, right? So this model, I introduced this, right? Because I think that it actually helps to explain a lot of the things that we see in meetings, right? A lot of those kind of bad meeting behaviors, I think, are a direct response to people feeling challenged or threatened in terms of their social needs, right? So, for example, that person who is constantly dominating the conversation, maybe they need to feel important, right? So maybe what they're responding to is the fact that they don't feel important. So maybe what you need to do when you address that behavior is to address the inherent need. You know what, Jim? I think what you're saying is really, really critical, and I think that we all need to pay attention to your perspective. But at the same time, I think that it's really important to hear other people's perspectives or whatever, right? What we're doing there is we're trying to reassure people that their needs will be met, but at the same time, redirect so that other folks can actually feel the same sense of importance, right? A lot of people will complain about feeling excluded from the group, right? That goes back to relatedness, the need to feel like we're connected. There's always people in the group who feel like they are not being treated equitably, whether that is, a perception or whether it's an actuality, right? That's something for the group to work out, right? But again, you are not responsible for meeting everyone's psychological needs or everyone's social needs, right? Because, you just can't be responsible for that. But I do think it's useful when you see people who have patterns of behavior in meetings that are disruptive to start to think more about where that disruption comes from, right? What is it that this person is looking for that they're not getting out of our meetings? And you might find, okay, well, you know what? I can't make Jim feel any more important. Jim needs to chill out, right? And that's totally fine. But it's always good to kind of consider that before you call someone out, I think. Always consider a call in before a call out. Consider, again, there might be situations that are so egregious where you definitely have to call someone out right away, but always consider the call in before the call out. And when you're thinking about calling in, think about some of these things. So think about some of these kind of negative disruptive behaviors as the result of some feeling of deficiency within the person. That's my psychology of meetings. All right, folks. So, kind of open it up for discussion now. Talk a little bit more. Are there any, well, first of all, are there any questions or anything? And then I wanted to kind of open it up for brainstorming around specific situations. So people could, talk a little bit about specific problems or challenges that they've had in their groups or that they've seen in groups, and we can sort of brainstorm what we might do about them, how we might diffuse that conflict. Does that make sense? A good question. Yeah. So I think that timing things out is definitely good. It helps people to realize exactly what what part of the conversation we're having right now, and also what part of the conversation is coming up, and that can help actually help with disruptions as well, right? Like if I know that, we're not talking about transportation to the action right now, but I know that we're going to be talking about it later on the agenda, right? Then maybe I can hold my burning thoughts about transportation or whatever. I do think so. It is worth timing things out, and it's worth spelling out when you're going to be talking about different things in the agenda. That being said, facilitating is an art and not a science, right? And so you can end up looking like a real pain in the ass if you insist on, cutting people off mid-sentence in order to move to the next agenda item. So I think it's really important to be kind of smooth in your transitions, and to make sure that you're leaving space for people to talk, even if maybe the 1 minute mark has passed or whatever. Um, so that is that. I do think that a variety of different experiences can be, in terms of like modalities of dealing with each other, can be really useful in a meeting. So when you're talking about like doing breakout groups, that kind of thing, a lot of people will feel more comfortable speaking in a small group, or just having a more intimate conversation with different people may spark different ideas in them, that kind of thing. So it's great, I think, to shuffle it between large group discussion and smaller group discussion, that kind of thing. I think when you do breakout groups, what you really want to do, though, is make sure that each breakout group has a really clear idea about what they're going to accomplish during that breakout group. Um, because otherwise, people will just sit there and chat about the weather, which is important and interesting because we're all going to die because of climate change, but maybe not relevant to your action plans. Does that make sense? Does that sort of answer what you were asking? Those are all good questions.
It does. I was just looking for advice from somebody that's been doing it for a while, and I've been more of a on the web parts of it. I've been more of just a participant and not a leader or somebody who set it up. And so, yeah, I was just looking for your insight. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. And we're going to be talking a lot about leadership development tomorrow. That's tomorrow's topic. So we'll have a lot to talk about. Tomorrow, also, by the way, I'll be able to stay for the full hour and a half. So we'll have plenty more time for answering questions and stuff. I'm sorry. Kaya, is that right? Kaya?
Yeah, you got it.
Cool.
I had a question about what you were saying about the step up and step back. I know when I've been on exec board for clubs or other organizations before, I've run into the issue where there are people who I know are very smart or have something to contribute to a conversation, and then they don't end up contributing because they're either nervous or they're more shy or introverted. And do you have any techniques that we can use to encourage people in a way that will allow them to remain in their comfort zone, but also take a step out?
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, this is something that I think I, as a person, am maybe a little bit bad at because I started out my career as, maybe I should have told you this before, but I started out my career as an English professor, and then I got sick in the middle of grad school. And so by the time I finished my PhD, I was like, fuck this. I need to get out of the classroom. I need to be in the streets. I need to be like fighting for healthcare justice. And so that's actually how I transitioned into organizing after I got my PhD. I was like, I'm out. Um, and so um, and so that's how I ended up here. Why am I telling this story though? That's the question. Kaya. Right. Oh, so one of the things that I tend to do is to actually go into English professor mode, and I actually call on people. Um, and, I mean, it depends on how much charisma you have as to whether or not that works for people, because it can put people outside of their comfort zone. Some people, though, are happy to be called on. And so I would advocate that you use that judiciously. But if you see someone who's like being really quiet and sullen in the corner, it's worth being like, hey, did you have something to say? Or, it's fine if you want to sit there with your feelings or whatever. Another thing to do, though, is to, when you know that someone is going to have a really important perspective on a particular issue or whatever, you can prepare them for the meeting that way. So, like I, we're going to be talking about domestic violence survivors' access to healthcare next time. And I know that you have a perspective that everybody really needs to hear. Like, people need to hear what you have to say about this. So, do you want to practice with me? I really want you to talk at the next meeting though, because again, the group needs you, right? Because it helps to make the pharma companies toxic, right? And it helps to disrupt their hold. And then the second thing is that is going to materially improve the lives of millions of people, right? So I think that part of it is contextualizing the smaller wins, right? So like saying like, fuck it, we did not win Medicare for all this year, but we improved the lives of millions of people through our advocacy. That's incredible, right? So acknowledging a win is a win. And then the second thing is that building it into the agenda makes it feel less pity, feel less like pity. So one of the things that I really love to do is appreciations. There are always going to be people again who resist doing the touchy feely piece, but those are the people who need appreciations most. I used to do this with labor people. We would do this thing. We were at a terrible moment for one of our coalitions. We were working on public education stuff, and everyone really needed to get together. And so we did an exercise where we did appreciations for each other. Everybody wrote their name at the top of a piece of paper, and then we passed it around the table. And each person wrote something they appreciated about what the person at the top of the page brought to the work. Again, I had like labor dudes being like, this is bullshit or whatever. And then, like, weeks later, I saw that they had these pieces of paper pinned up behind their desks, like, because everyone needs that shit, whether they admit it or not. So I love building in appreciations. I think that's a great way. And then I think it's also good for, as a leader, to call out people who specifically have done really awesome stuff. And you want to keep in mind the big stuff and the little stuff too. Like, I just really loved the way that you designed that flyer for the action. It was really, really awesome. And I know you don't have a lot of experience in graphic design. You made it look great. That's a win. So I think that those things are really, really critical. It's a sign of leadership is to be able to make people feel good about the work for sure. Does that make sense? Does that address some of the things you're asking?
Yes, definitely. And I love that idea of appreciations because that's just such a cute story.
It is so cute. It is so cute. Dude, this guy still has this behind his desk right now. It was like 5 years ago. But yeah, it makes people feel good. Fuck it.
Yeah.
All right. I've got Gabriella, and then I think I had Danielle on as well. So yeah, let's Gabriella and then Danielle. And then we'll wrap up for today so that I can go to the doctor, have a little white coat anxiety, and then tomorrow we'll reconvene and I'll process that anxiety with you. And we'll talk about leadership development. All right, Gabrielle.
Hi, thank you for being with us today. My question was just around being mindful of the fact that in a lot of advocacy work, people are volunteering their time and have other full-time jobs and social lives and just self-care that they need to worry about. Where's the line when you're planning your meeting and looking at the material you have to cover where you're like, this is enough that it deserves bringing everyone together and having this meeting versus this could just be an email?
That is a really, really, really good point. I think that one of the things we learned over the pandemic, right, is that there is value to meeting even when there's not a whole lot to be done, right? So much organizing work